Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to try to figure out how to find the slope from a graph. So before we get started, what is slope? So you might have heard of this definition of slope. Slope is the rise over the run. But what does that mean in terms of our graph? So taking a look at this graph here, if I want to figure out what the rise is, which axis measures up and down? The y-axis. So typically we define the rise as the change in y. Now taking a look at the run, which axis measures left to right? The x-axis. So typically we define the run as the change in x. So the definition I like to use for slope is the change in y, the up and down, over the change in x, the left and right direction. So let's take a look at a couple of these practice problems. I want to find the slope of this graph here. How do I get from one point to the next? So first I need to find my change in y. So I'm going to use one color for my change in y, red. And starting down here, how many spaces up do I need to move in order to reach the next point? I need to move 1, 2, 3 spaces. So I know that my change in y is going to be 3. Now taking a look at my change in x, I'm going to pick a different color for x. I'm going to use blue. And so how many spaces to the right do I need to move in order to reach the next point? 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I know that my change in x is going to be 4. So the slope of this graph is going to be 3 over 4. And take a closer look at our picture. Notice how I made this little triangle on my graph. I need to follow this triangle in order to go from one point to the next. So try to keep that image in your mind when we're trying to find slope. So here's the second problem. I want to find the slope of this graph here. First, I need to find the change in y. So starting at one point, how many spaces down do I need to move in order to get to the next point? Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it looks like my change in y is going to be 5. But wait, since I'm moving down, is my change in y going to be positive 5 or negative 5? It's going to be negative 5 because I know down is the negative direction. So my slope is going to be negative 5. Now let's find my change in x. So how many spaces to the right do I need to move in order to reach my point? 1, 2. And so I know my change in x is going to be 2. And again, I follow the path of this triangle in order to get from one point to the next. So I know the slope of this graph is going to be negative 5 over 2. Okay, take a look at this third example. How do I get from one point to the next? What's the difference between this problem and the other problems we looked at? Do you notice how this graph has more than one point? So the question is, which of these points do I need to use in order to find my slope? So the nice thing about slope is, it doesn't really matter which points we use. As long as we use 2 points on the graph, we should always get the same slope. So I'm going to show you guys 2 examples. I'm going to find the slope from these 2 dots, and then I'm going to find the slope from another 2 points. So let's find the slope between these 2 points. First, let's find my change in y. So from this point to this point, how many spaces up do I need to move? I need to move 1 space. So that's a change in 1. And then let's find my change in x. My left and right change. I need to move 3 spaces to the right. So I know that my change in x is going to be 3. Okay. Will we get the same slope if I use, for example, these 2 points, these 2 orange dots? Let's find out. Okay. If I want to find my change in y, and then figure how much up I need to move, which is 1. And if I want to find my change in x, how much to the right do I need to move? 3. So again, it doesn't really matter which points we use. As long as we pick 2 points on the graph, we should always get the same slope. Okay? We should always get the same slope. Right? And finally, the last problem. Let's find the slope of this graph here. So I want to find the change in y, which I'm going to mark using red, which is the up and down direction. So how many spaces down do I need to move? Looks like I'm moving 1 space. So my change in y is going to be negative 1. Now let's find my change in x. How many spaces to the right do I need to move? Let's go 1, 2. So it looks like my change in x is 2. So this slope is going to be negative 1 over 2, right? Take a closer look at this graph. How is this graph different from the other ones we've been looking at? So hopefully you guys noticed that if I take a look at the y-axis, this isn't going by 1s, this is going by 5s. And if I took a look at the x-axis, This isn't going by ones, this is going by twos. So since the scales of my graph change, my slope is going to be different. So let's try this again. So let's find my change in y. Okay, so I'm moving only one space, but each of these spaces represents 5. So I know that this change is going to be a change of -5. Okay, and now let's look at my change in x. Even though I'm moving 2 dashes to the right, I know that each of these segments is going to be worth 2. So this makes a total of a change in 4. So my change in x is going to be 4. So make sure that when you guys are finding slope, you guys are always paying attention to the scaling of the graph. So when we find slope, we're always looking for the change in y over the change in x.